Boardwalk Empire follows part-time politician, part-time gangster Nucky Thompson in 1920s Atlantic City, featuring a colourful roster of characters, some real-life historical figures such as Al Capone, Lucky Luciano and Arnold Rothstein, and some fictional characters like Jimmy Darmody and Richard Harrow. One of the standout characters of the show is Nelson Van Alden, a devout religious Protestant and a Bureau of Prohibition agent. One of the few straight arrows in the show, Van Alden is uncompromising and steadfast, both in terms of his place as a servant of his faith and his role in apprehending villains such as Nucky Thompson, played with presence, restraint and subtle humour by the brilliant Michael Shannon. Nelson's life takes a massive nosedive and keeps on going when he is forced to flee after murdering his corrupt partner. After spending a short time on the show as a hunter of the crooks that swarm Atlantic City, Nelson's life becomes an interesting case study of when something can go wrong in life, it will go wrong. He has an illegitimate child, becomes an iron salesman, and somehow even ends up working for the Chicago outfit under Al Capone before being shot dead by undercover FBI agent Mike D'Angelo. I always liked Van Alden as a character and found him fascinating. He was admirable in his convictions and incorruptible nature, with the obvious temptations that there were as proven by when he takes Margaret's ribbon and keeps it. And then to see his frustration at corruption among his own ranks manifesting in a cathartic display of quote-unquote justice and or revenge. To see a frustrated man make one or two slips of judgment, and then to see his life spiral out of control was fascinating. But I did have some frustrations with the character, namely that he started off as straight-laced, but over the course of the show essentially ended up as a comic relief character, often serving only to have something dastardly happen to him. The poor guy just couldn't catch a break. Of course, a character's arc is at the mercy of the whim of the show's writers, but still I couldn't help but feel more could have been done with Nelson, and I really always anticipated a redemption arc. I thought he started as an upstanding citizen, was corrupted by Atlantic City, went as low as you can possibly go, and then would rise again and restore some dignity, maybe sending one or two prominent Boardwalk Empire characters to prison. But when he died, it just kind of came out of nowhere, and even his death, in a way, was a comic relief moment. Okay, he got a little moment of catharsis as he shouted at Capone, but it wasn't much. It kind of ties into what I said in my video, Why You're Wrong About Boardwalk Empire, about the show having a feeling of building towards something, and that something never happening. Van Alden's arc is an example of that. Interestingly, Shannon himself seems to echo the sentiment about his character, expressing disappointment of Van Alden's arc. He has given some honest and candid interviews over the years about Boardwalk Empire and his character. For Vanity Fair, for example, he went through some of his notable roles and had this to say about Boardwalk Empire and Nelson Van Alden.
What I thought was going to happen is that you were going to see Van Alden fall from grace, and then you were going to see him like a phoenix rise from the ashes. It was interesting that that didn't really happen. What actually wound up being the storyline is he just kept sinking further and further into abject despair and humiliation. I'm not gonna lie, I would have preferred the first storyline maybe, but you know, people seem to be really entertained by watching poor Nelson's struggle. So who am I to say different?
I don't think this is necessarily coming from a place of ego and self-interest, with him wanting a bigger role or to have Van Alden become a hero who saves the day. His thoughts are valid, and from interviews I've seen him do, he really does like to get into the characters' heads and their motivations and arcs. He takes the craft seriously and is aware his job is to deliver what the writers and directors want. He said as much in the past. In another interview talking about his character, he said, I do ultimately believe he has good intentions and he wants to do the right thing, and he goes to Atlantic City believing that he can do some good in the world, but he is also surrounded by people thwarting him at every turn, so that act of drowning his fellow agent is the culmination of a great deal of frustration. Elsewhere he has said, he's a sad character. I think it is a Frankenstein scenario in a way, because I think inside of Van Alden is a child, that arrested child, that never really got to develop its own identity. I think as much as he believes he's operating from these deeply held beliefs, he's actually in a way very hollow. Terence Winter, the show's creator, did mention that one of the themes of the show was going to be how Atlantic City can corrupt people like the snake in the Garden of Eden, and how everybody in the story was going to have trials and tribulations from being in Atlantic City. In an interview with Variety, he was very direct, saying, "I wasn't always happy with what was happening with Van Alden. I honestly thought it could have been a lot more interesting. I thought it fell into a very repetitive thing, particularly towards the end where he's just being constantly humiliated and he tries to take it. Then he loses his shit and does something bad and then he does it again. It's a classic structure. It's almost like a very dour Three Stooges. The great dark secret of humanity is that people love to watch other people squirm. They love to watch other people suffer, which is really strange." There's another interview he did. It was about something else, but the interviewer asked if he ever watched Boardwalk Empire, and he said, I watched a little bit of Boardwalk. They sent me a bunch of DVDs, but they just kind of sit around the house. I give them away. They're good presents." I mean, it sounds strange, but there's nothing untoward here. You'd be surprised how many actors don't actually watch their own work. Edie Falco and Robert Eyler, who played Carmela and AJ on The Sopranos, for example, never saw the show. I think it comes from a good place, the things Shannon says, an earnestness. He was invested in the character, he thought he was interesting and he thought it was leading to something, but Nelson became a bit of a comic relief. He also has said he was surprised how many people talked to him, praised him for his performance, but then said they hated his character. Perhaps it made him feel a little insecure, as if the subtleties and complexities of the character weren't coming across to the audience. As he said, "I do have a lot of sympathy for him. I think Van Alden has a very hard life, and I feel for him. A lot of people will stop me and say, 'Oh, I watched Boardwalk Empire, I love the show, you're good on it, but I hate your character. He's such an asshole.' And I like to say, why do you think he's a bad guy? Why does everybody hate this guy? Is it so hard to understand what happened to him, or is he too opaque? When I look at him, he makes me really sad. He tries really hard to do the right thing, and he failed, and then he went off the rails. But the character seems to elicit some really negative feelings from people, which makes me a little defensive sometimes. I think it's partly because he sees things from the character's perspective. As he said in one interview, there's no distance really. I don't think that really works, at least for me. I just try to be him, as much as I can possibly be, and as much as anybody could be some other person that they're not. But I'm never presenting it through any sort of lens. I'm just trying to be as direct and honest as I can. I've certainly experienced the kind of guilt that Van Alden feels a lot of the time, though not to that extreme degree. I felt guilt like that. I think that's something that anybody can identify with. That's what Van Alden represents. He just represents this overwhelming guilt, and it's all the more heartbreaking because it's coming from a man with good intentions. I think Van Alden started out with very good intentions. He wasn't a corrupt person. So to see that fall from grace, I feel like that's something that I can identify with, or I think a lot of people probably have experienced at some point in their lives, I would imagine. I mean, take a look at this extract from an interview he did with Collider when promoting Season 2. You might not agree with his take, but look how invested in the character he is, where other actors sometimes have no idea what their character is doing in a scene. It makes his eventual disappointment with Van Alden's end all the more understandable. I think Van Alden really just gave up. Van Alden really tried in Season 1. He knew what happened and he knew who was guilty and he knew what should have been done but couldn't do it. His supervisor wouldn't let him do it. Sebso screwed him over, so he gave up and he descended into this really dark place where he started drinking and knocked up Lucy. For me, this season is about Van Alden trying to accept what he's done and trying to redeem himself. Honestly, right now, Van Alden can really give a flying rat's butt about alcohol. I think he's a lot more concerned about this baby that he has and his wife. I believe that Van Alden really loves Rose. I think that's why the first episode was Rose coming to visit him in Atlantic City. In an ideal world for Van Alden, he would be able to get back to Rose and the life he had before all this started in the first place. He's really focused on trying to make spun gold out of hay because he thinks he can get this baby. Rose finds out about Lucy. His plan is to try to get this baby because he figures Lucy is not going to want the baby. He wants to give it to Rose and say, "Oh, it's an orphan," or "I found this baby on a doorstep." It's a ludicrous plan, but it's the only possible way that the situation could have any bright side whatsoever. That's what he's shooting for. So I think Van Alden is really more concerned about himself at this point than Nucky Thompson. He's very frightened for himself and his soul. He knows that he's sinned a great deal and that he's probably not in God's good graces anymore, so he would like to rectify that somehow. And I think that's a fantastic analysis of the character. Shannon should be doing my job. He nailed where Van Alden was coming from. The whole thing, his plan with the baby, as far as I can remember, he never articulates this in the show, but you can tell Nelson has a plan to bring the child into Rose's life, and Shannon knew exactly where his character was at, mentally. The Collider interview is really interesting because, and this is while they were filming the show, he expresses disappointment with what his character was doing. When I got the script for episode 10 last year, where I got to the speak say and drink and then go have sex with Lucy, that was a hard pill to swallow. I didn't want to do it. I didn't want to believe that Van Alden would fall apart that quickly. I saw it coming, but I didn't think it would be in the first season. I wasn't belligerent about it, but it just made me kind of depressed because I was really excited to be playing the guy taking down this corrupt system. To realize I was just going to end up being another corrupt person myself was hard. But when I look back on the season as a whole, it's great writing. Terence Winter and the writing staff have so much to keep track of. You have to trust them because they're some of the best writers in the business. You can't become all myopic about your own storyline. You've got to trust it because it's like conducting an orchestra. They've got all these different instruments going at the same time and they know the sound that each instrument needs to make in order for there to be a coherent piece of music. You've got to remember that everything that is happening with your character is juxtaposed with all these other stories on the show, and every other episode has a theme, and you have to trust that they've got it all organized. In the same interview, he said, while talking about what path Van Alden could be headed towards, "I'm speculating as much as anybody, but I don't think he's going to say, 'I'll just throw away everything I believe in and just become a cold-blooded killer.' I don't know if that's what Terry wants, but I have a feeling that he will always be trying to return to a place of faith and redemption. It's not going to be easy, but I feel like if that's totally abandoned by the show, then I don't really understand the point of the character or why the character's on the show. There needs to be a constant yearning to get back to that place of righteousness. If he just becomes another thug, the show doesn't really need that. There are plenty of thugs, but I could be totally wrong. He might wind up being that. And I think that yearning to righteousness did come across in the show, which is why it was disappointing that in season 5, a season full of disappointment, that Van Alden just dies suddenly. And I think Michael Shannon is in a similar boat with thinking what the potential of this character was. So what do you think of Nelson Van Alden? Were you happy with his ending? Let me know in the comments below, and thanks for watching.